I want to start here too, because I think a lot of people, sort of wish that that Cross-Politic went a little harder on Andrew. And this is where I want to start, right? You get this Ligon Duncan, talking about the Moscow mood, how they're just lob grenades indiscriminately. That is crazy. All that kind of stuff. They never handle it like nicely. And it's such a lie, number one, on the face of it. But number two, I really don't understand. Well, I mean, I know where it comes from, but this reputation is just totally false. These guys are like the nuance kings. You know what I mean? Sure, they lob grenades. Ouch. But all the way up to the top, and Doug Wilson, he's like the emperor of Moscow, I guess. I've always thought of Doug as like one of the most nuanced people imaginable. Sometimes I think Doug kind of over nuances things, and it ends up not being that great. But these guys are gracious guys. Like, if you know anything about Cross-Politic in Moscow, they get grace and they build bridges. And the thing is, they do lob grenades, but they lob grenades in like the most friendly way you could imagine.
Who is he talking about?
I don't know. We're nuanced?
You know what,
we
AD?
build bridges?
My feelings are hurt.
I just
You call us the nuance kings.
No, that would be David Bonson. He's like he really is
real.
great at
That's
knowing.
real.
But I just want to say this real quick to AD. You're not getting a better spot on the network. We're not sending you any money. Your show is. We're not doing anything special for you. You don't get to speak at the conferences. It's not. So just stop, okay? But I appreciate. It is nice though when somebody from your network kind of defends you a little bit when everybody else comes for your throat. Yeah. And it was really nice to have AD saying, "Wait a second."
Yeah.
All right, folks. Have you ever thought, I want to do work that really matters,
Every day.
more than a job, and impact? Well, Story Real Estate is making waves in our community by helping others build legacies through real estate here in Moscow, Idaho. And they're looking for kingdom builders to join their tribe. If that sounds like you, go to storyrealestate.com. That's storyrealestate.com today. Click the menu and then click on Join Our Team to apply today.
If you don't already know, you're on Cross-Politic. Okay.
Well, thanks for the intro.
And if you haven't heard,
Not the 80 Robles show.
I think we have a fourth chair. Let's just add AD to this.
if you guys haven't been paying attention to this last week, there's this whole Jesus is King Twitter thing that blew up, and people were using the term Jesus is King. Apparently, some people were. Again, if you listened to our show last week, the Andrew Klavan, Nick Fuentes apparently was using it, and some others, but people that I would never build my definitions off of around.
Andrew Tate.
Andrew Tate was using, and they were basically trying to use Jesus King as some sort of anti-Semitic shot at the Jews. So we had Andrew Klavan did a show Friday before we had him on Monday or whatever, Tuesday.
About 10 days ago.
And that show, he was kind of explaining, how people are being anti-Semitic with using the term Jesus King. And that show kind of blew up.
And he just
re-energized the controversy.
Well, part of what he said in that show in the opening was that he's like, I've had people who been good friends to me, but these Jesus is King people, this whole statement is anti-Semitic, right? And because it says that God has forgotten about the Jews and he's done with the Jews. Yeah. And so it's like, whoa, hey, we're friends with Andrew Klavan. Yeah. We kind of fit in that camp, but we're not.
But we're doing it because of our post-mill eschatology that is the kind of feeding some of our view of that. And then so Andrew does the show on Jesus King, and then that kind of blows up. And then so hey, Andrew's a friend. Let's get him on our show on Monday or Tuesday when we interviewed him. I can't remember. And so then our show became kind of an additional adding to the fire.
Right.
Candace
Owens.
Jesus King. Candace Owens shared.
Retweeted.
She's coming on, right?
Part of the show.
Candace, you coming on?
Come on, Candace.
I'd love for you to come on.
I'd love to get her on.
Because I heard things about you. Anyway.
I now that she's not with Daily Wire anymore, I don't have some of the contact info that I had to her in the past. So I got to figure out new channels for that. So Lord willing, we'll get Candace on and all this.
So part of what we were, I think some of we got there's been a number of different sort of pockets of feedback on the conversation we had with Andrew.
Can I just say one thing real quick before you launch into that? One of them is, guys, stop saying or asking the question, why did you guys platform Klavan? That is one of the most laughable things I've ever
People are
heard.
saying that?
People are like, you guys shouldn't have platformed Klavan. It's like, you guys understand, like, Klavan's here on the platforming line, and we're not there at all.
We ain't helping him grow his audience at all. If anything, it's not good for him to come on Cross Politics.
I just want everybody to know, out of all the shows we've done this year on YouTube, that show is the highest show of all the shows. And if you look at Andrew Klavan's show, it's his lowest show. So we're not. So let's just be very clear on who's platforming who, and we're very grateful that he decided to come on the show. Anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. Right. That's one of the things that drove me nuts.
That's funny.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a 40-minute show, 45-minute show, and obviously, like, if we had the afternoon, we'd love to spend hours with Andrew.
Oh, I wanted more time.
And we have had him on before. He's been in town before. We've had him in the studio before. And people were chiming in. What about his views of homosexuality or what? And we've talked to him about these other things on previous shows. Yeah. There have been some clips that have gone around that cut out everything that we said.
with him. Yeah.
So catch the actual original interview. I don't know. Somebody shared some clip of him talking about.
That was the most ungenerous edit I've ever seen.
Homosexuality, and like we didn't say anything in response, and then we were just like smiling and laughing along or something. It's like no, like we had real conversations.
What you notice here is like there's a marriage of trolls that came together. Yeah. So Andrew Klavan's trolls came at us, and our trolls came at Andrew Klavan.
Yeah. Anyways,
and then the trolls are feeding off each other. And so
the enemy of my enemy is my. No, I don't know what it is.
Whatever
my friend.
It is.
But what we were trying to do, there's stories within story, and there's also, I know there's different pockets of you that are paying attention to different things, and this is just the fun of living in God's world and having a social media age. But we had what I would break down our conversation with Andrew into three kind of roughly, they're all connected, but
I have three things too.
Semi-distinct conversations that we were having. Initially, what we were talking about is basically we gave Andrew an opportunity to describe his own sort of theology of salvation. And so he was kind of, I think we're talking more generally. Now, of course, in context, we're talking about the Jews, and we're talking about some comments he made about Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, and whether they're saved or not, they're okay or not. And we moved from there into the Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson conversation more specifically. Yeah. And then finally at the end, we got a little bit into the Jewish question, but not as far as I think it would have been fun to get into.
The Jewish question, which was what?
I think some people were taking our conversation about salvation as being something like, so I had one guy on Twitter, for example, immediately respond and say, so the Jews are all saved like infants that die in their infancy.
Right, because he thought that you were making
so I replied and I quote tweeted it and said, I didn't say that. I don't think that. And he was kind enough to reply and say, that's what it sounded like you were saying, and this is a good faith, critique or something like that. And so we had a little bit of back and forth. And I said, no. The context was him talking about, is there anything in the Bible that suggests that there are people who are saved in semi-extraordinary ways? And the answer is yes. Jesus does. You have the Samaritans. You do have the parable of the sheep and the goats, where the sheep show up and apparently didn't know that they were doing their good works unto the king. Yeah. And remember, Samaritans are like first century Mormons, and so for Jesus to make the hero of the Good Samaritan story.
Yeah, I didn't. But that piece for me was, if you're talking about, so the lady at the well, right?
Yeah, okay. And he says, you worship who you do not know. Yeah. The Jews worship who they know. Right. And so I think my take was Klavan was just making a general point that in general, not in general, but there is a category of people for whom the New Testament describes that maybe are saved in extraordinary ways.
But that, I guess the reason why I guess I can't click with that is because what happened with Jesus, they repented. There was a conversion before their death in the process of that whole thing taking place, or that we can see and read about.
But not the sheep and the goats.
But at least I'm not talking about that. I'll get to that one in a second. Okay, all right. But I'm just, at least with the Samaritan woman goes back and proclaims the gospel about who Jesus is.
Sure, but
so these people give them knowledge of who he is.
But he said that the Samaritans were worshiping a God they didn't know. So I mean, the Samaritan that died the day before Jesus got there. I mean, I'm saying I
don't know about that one.
I would be agnostic too, but I'm just saying it seems like there's a possibility that some of those Samaritans, though it was mixed up with bad stuff,
right,
that they were worshiping the true God. whom they barely knew. That's what Jesus describes them as. And there's other examples of this that Klavan didn't bring up. In Acts, Paul points to the altar to the unknown God and says, I know the name of that God.
But so I think the traditional, and this is what, and I have a question in this along with the Klavan thing, because I loved your article that you wrote about this. Everybody needs to go read that article because it gives a context, a true context to the conversation that we had with Klavan. And because we talked about C.S. Lewis, and you guys were in a completely, you guys were tracking in a way that I wasn't. So this is where my question is. Inside of that situation, the unknown God, the traditional historical that I think Reform position is like those people then who are in that situation where they have an altar to the unknown God because they want to do right, which is, let's just say they want, okay. Because when I say stuff like that, Romans 3 pops in my head. No one seeks after God. No, not one. No one does right. Like that, that just, everybody is guilty before God, the end. So that's the first thing. But let's just say, then what God does is he sends missionaries like he did with Paul there to them to preach to them the gospel. So the ones that he wants to win, he draws into himself. Same thing with the Samaritan woman. That same thing is a situation that happens, particularly after we have the full revelation of Jesus Christ and he's been raised from the dead.
Right. So
then we have a whole different, and so we don't have Abraham's bosom in the same way we had once before. So you have this whole new structure and setup that it works that way.
Right.
So that's why I guess for me was,
right. So,
and this follows to my next question.
So in Acts 17 though, you have Paul who points to the altar of the unknown God and says, and at times past, God, and the language is literally winked at your ignorance. And then he says, but now he's calling everybody to repentance because he's raised his son from the dead. So
there's a transition where there's...
So I would say there's a transition going from Old Covenant to New Covenant. And in the Old Covenant, it appears that God saved more people that were further away. And again, you think of people like Cyrus or Nebuchadnezzar, or think of people like Jethro, or these Gentile pagans who have greater or lesser degrees of knowledge. I mean, the Ninevites repented apparently with one day of preaching.
And it's a little bitter preaching too.
And the preacher was kind of...
He's kind of a little pissed. There's a little bitterness in that preaching.
It was a rough go. Yeah. But also doesn't appear to have lasted very long because then Assyria is a pretty wicked nation pretty quickly thereafter. Yeah. But their knowledge was very minimal. Is the point. Yeah. But God seems to have had a kind of overlooking of certain kinds of ignorance and saved pretty graciously, particularly in the Old Covenant. But yes, you're right. In a New Covenant, as he's raised his son from the dead, there is a turn in saying now he's calling everybody to repent and believe in Jesus Christ. And that's why we would say there's no ordinary salvation outside of the church, outside of the proclamation of the gospel. You believe in your heart, you confess with your mouth that Jesus is raised from the dead. Romans 10.
Would you believe that, there's, let's say, some tribe in deep Africa who, because of God's kindness through, looking at the stars and natural revelation and seeing and knowing that there's a creator and worshiping that creator, God, do you think there's a situation where they could be saved?
Yeah. So it seems to me that you've got Old Covenant, New Covenant. Yeah. And the question is does that transition happen just straight across the board, like a light switch, click off, on? Yeah. Or, even just the time from the resurrection to when Paul got to Athens. Yeah. Had anybody died between the resurrection and when Paul got to Athens who worshiped the unknown God, the God who created everything,
heaven and earth,
but he, was in a pantheon and it was confused. Yeah. Could God have saved any of those? I'm not saying he did, or had to, certainly not. Yeah. But Paul says when he gets there, I know this God that this is pointing to, and this God is the God who made the heavens and the earth. Yeah.
And whom you're worshiping.
Yeah. Whom you and in times past, he overlooked your ignorance. Yeah. Thinking that you could worship God through idols and statues and things like that. But now he's recalling everybody to repentance and worship Jesus Christ. Yeah. If there's any transition period, then the next question would be, well, what about
how long and where?
Yeah, how long and where? Because did it only last to 70 AD when the temple was destroyed? Right. Maybe one reasonable thing. But is it possible that you have you've got these Eastern tribes, the Magi, for example, that apparently knew there was a Messiah coming and knew to look for his star. Right. These are Persian pagans. Yep. who if we, and by the way, we don't know how many there were, but let's say there were 4 originally.
Well,
we know
we know three kings of Orientar.
We know there are 3 kings now,
but I mean,
because of the song. But what
bearing
if
gifts traveled far?
But what if the 4th? Thank you, Gabe. What if the 4th died on the way?
Yeah.
Did he go to heaven?
But well, of course, because it would seem to me, though, I think the idea of Persian pagans representing those guys is hard to fully embrace. Thinking because only because I know that they believe the promise of the Messiah coming. Mm-hmm. So they're holding to the stars, they're following after their mentors beforehand. So whatever these guys were, I would want to hold them different as far as different from the pagans. Whatever they were.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I guess that's part of the issue is it seems that, again, Acts 17, I would point to, the Samaritans. I mean, if you read about the Samaritans in 2 Chronicles, I mean, these are people who...
I agree.
Who mixed, they worship the true God with the religions around them.
But not those Samaritans Jesus was talking to. They repented. And revival broke out.
Yeah, afterwards.
Right. Right. And so there is a... But
the Good Samaritan, we're not given any word that he had repented.
Right. And that's where I want to be careful, because I think part of... I don't have any theology for that necessarily, right? Like, I don't know how.
Right, and that's the whole point of me bringing up the children dying in infancy was like there.
I have theology for that.
Yeah,
I do have a theology for that.
Well, there's I guess the what's that?
Covenant theology.
Yeah. But what do you say for pagan?
Well, I
don't know how to answer that.
What about pagan babies?
I don't have an answer for that one.
I think it is. It is connected to covenant theology. God always had higher expectations for his covenant people. Right? That's Romans, right? And you see in Galatians chapter 4, we're coming into a greater covenant. Hebrews chapter 11, the last verse in Hebrews chapter 11 is like, you guys, I expect more out of you than the saints that went before you in the Old Testament.
Right.
So the newer covenant, there's greater expectation, which is why I think the salvation of the world and the salvation of Gentiles, the expectation is now greater on them now that Christ has risen again.
Yeah.
So and when I say I don't have a theology for that, what I mean is the only can answer that the same way I would answer any sort of other pagan reality, right? And that's if you're a pagan, I put you in that category, and I put God's children, covenant children, in a different category than I put even Baptist kids, right? Right?
There you are, lobbing grenades again.
I guess
very graciously.
But you guys had worked. I guess I hadn't worked this. I haven't read Lewis.
Well,
so I haven't worked out.
Yeah,
in the same way you guys have. So you guys knew, at least had a context for where Andrew might be coming from.
Right, and that's why I pointed to the last battle. Is one of the, I brought this up with my kids at home. I was talking to them at dinner time, and my kids have been like, "You mean like the last battle, Dad?" I didn't even get a chance to bring like
my kids will be like that, not me.
Brought it up.
Last battle.
So I don't understand. Explain Lewis's position for me then.
Well, I would say it's very similar to what Klavan articulated on our show, and I would say Lewis is more optimistic than I am also.
Well, but I feel like when I asked Klavan,
more optimistic than you.
So Klavan's saying things like, "I don't have any concerns with Ben Shapiro."
I do.
Right,
I do, and this was what I moved to. I wanted to affirm. I can say that without everybody accusing me of being liberal. That I think there's a category of extraordinary salvation, infant people, children dying in infancy being one of them, and I think there are these insinuations of others where they had very, very little light, very little, and God saves them. But then I immediately transitioned to, but God is holy, and Jesus died for a reason, and we don't have any. Apart from, I think, some covenant promises, which give us, I think, some security for covenant kids.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, we should not be complacent. We should not think, well, God will save them. I got good vibes.
Yeah.
Because we're told very clearly that there is no salvation apart from Christ and apart from his blood. And I use the Passover examples. Like, if you're not under the blood, then you have every expectation of judgment.
Right.
And so that's where I go to where I differed with Klavan and say, I think somebody, A.D. Robles goes on in that show to say that he thinks Shapiro has a high degree of animus against Christianity, which I've not picked up on, and I don't know what he's talking about, and maybe that's true. But I was going off of is just what I've seen him do interviews with high-profile Christians, John MacArthur and others, and I've seen him be respectful and differ. We had him on the show.
He's respectful when he came on our show.
When we interviewed him.
And he told us when he came on our show, I appreciate having this debate with Christians because they don't want to kill me.
So I haven't seen Shapiro being like nasty to Christians. If that's happening, that would be, that's interesting. But I have seen him be pretty direct about saying, I reject Jesus as the Messiah.
Yeah.
And he's talked to a lot of high profile Christians. And so the reason why I would differ with Klavan on this is he's got the gospel being presented very clearly to him, and he's rejecting it.
That's where I was going to go
next.
next.
The gospel coming clear. Now,
Pastor, that's really good because the thing that I think that as watching it, going back and watching it, I think what people were paralleling was the fact that, okay, we're talking about this kind of abstract area where we don't really have all the information. Are we just take and slap that right onto people who are constantly, who we can walk across the street with and they reject Christ?
And I
just say, surprise, you're in heaven. Right. I hate being here.
No. and that was my point, though I didn't maybe drive it all the way to the end when I was talking about if you're not under the blood, we should have grave concerns for somebody. And then somebody on Twitter had asked me, so to be clear, you're saying that Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson are not going to heaven or something like that. And I said, well, with Ben Shapiro, given everything I've seen, I would be inclined to think not, because he's heard the gospel and he's rejected it.
He's the enemy of God in his mind.
So he has a lot of clear light, and it's not like he's ignorant.
I think that's the point that Klavan said that he disagreed, because that's what I presented at the end.
Yeah, and I think with Jordan Peterson, I actually am a little bit more agnostic because he seems to be wrestling with the gospel.
See, I'm not.
But I also would say he's got some funky psychological stuff going on. Like, he's into psychology. And
we have that in Christianity too. So it doesn't bother me so much.
But I'm just saying, like, he says things like, he's deeply moved by the gospel. He's and things like that. And I guess I'm more willing to give a little bit.
The gospel according to the lobster is what he.
But no. I think with him,
wasn't that he's the lobster in his book?
Yeah.
But I think with him, and this is the reason I say no. I don't have a problem still with. I'm not questioning. I still think he would face judgment day and not actually be in heaven. Is because I see that I hear him say things like, "Man, I want this to be true so bad. Like I want to believe so bad," and for whatever reason, God just hasn't given him that gift yet. Yeah. And it's not that he's not longing for and wanting it, at least the way that he communicates, but he hasn't had that regenerating life yet. What they say.
It certainly doesn't seem like it's clicked.
Right.
And I think, but again, C.S. Lewis has a similar story, and I'm not saying Jordan Peterson is going to land there or not. I certainly hope that he does. But C.S. Lewis in Surprised by Joy tells the story of going from ardent atheism and slowly kind of becoming a theist. I think there's a God, not sure which God, and if you can know this God, and then slowly warming up, particularly through his friendships with like J.R. Tolkien and some others. Wanting Christianity to be true and realizing that a lot of his literary heroes, so he's a literary scholar, were Christians. George MacDonald and others, loved Chaucer and Dante and these others, and realized all his heroes were Christians, and so he had a growing deep respect for it, and would talk in similar ways, like really wanted it to be true, and then he wrestles with it for a long time. Before finally having a very subtle, I mentioned this in my sermon this last Sunday, but in Surprised by Joy, I think he says he's on a bus or on a trolley or something. He's going to the zoo or going somewhere. And he says, all I know is on my way there, I wasn't a Christian. And on my way back, I was.
Yeah.
And something clicks.
Yeah.
Where he just says, okay, I am, I'm in.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly true, obviously, at his ability to profess it, which is presented to us in the New Testament as incredibly important. So we should not downplay the importance of that at all.
Confession.
You brought that up at the end of our conversation with Klavan. Like Jesus warns about those who will not profess him before men.
Right.
And so that's a high warning that we should hold tight. At the same time, I think there is and maybe this is not helpful when we're just seeking to save the lost. I mean, when we want to save the lost, we just need to preach the gospel, and we want to push all the way down to like confess Christ. We want it to click. And at the same time, I do think that God is, and this is to Andrew's point, is I do think God is sometimes has saved someone, and not all the pieces have clicked yet.
Well,
in our knowledge. And again, part of my reason for thinking this way is I do believe that God saves many children at a young age. And many of them, there's different points at which certain pieces of it click. Now, I believe there is an actual moment in which they were generated and given a new heart. I'm not saying it's all gradual, but I'm also saying it is not always as mechanical.
I think you're right to separate Ben Shapiro from Jordan Peterson. There's a clear difference in somebody who clearly rejects Jesus and somebody else who is infatuated and can't, and it hasn't
interested.
I still put them in the same camp ultimately at the end of the day with their salvation.
Well, they're certainly not. They're both non-Christians.
Yes.
In terms of their profession. Neither one of them are saying I am a Christian.
Right. And so I don't expect, And
I just Jordan Peterson baptized.
But I think those two people and that camp is a lot different from somebody who.
If he's baptized in Canada, and that just doesn't really count.
Lobbing grenades, but very, very kindly with a lot of love.
But there's a difference between
I'm just kidding.
There's a difference between that person and a person who grows up ignorant of their how to profess their theology. Yeah. They know they love Jesus. They don't know all the Bible. They believe Jesus. They grew up around the church. They love the Lord. They want to do right. I think that's a different person than what we're talking about with Shapiro.
Sure.
So I have a lot of grace for the ignorant person who professes. And I think just because their profession isn't necessarily as articulate, or even they can't even describe it, like you said, I was going this way, I hated my sin, I wanted to know Jesus, and now I'm going the other way. That's all I know. Yeah, right. And that's where I think, the discipleship works and all the other stuff works in the place. But I don't want to merge those categories in any way of the clarity of what's going on in these two. Right? That there's a profession there that's clear, and another person who's clearly rejecting. I can't get that person who's clearly rejecting theologically into a place where they're surprised by heaven.
No.
Right?
No.
That's where I think that's where I think we really disagreed with Klavan by the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, and this is why I would say, again, that's why I'm saying I think he's more optimistic than I am, because I don't think, and the example in Last Battle is this guy, a meth, who's a worshiper of Tash, the false god, who is surprised to show up in heaven.
Yeah, see, I can't do that.
Literally. He's like, what am I doing here? But he's trembling and loves Aslan. So he meets the character that represents Aslan and says, I know you should destroy me.
Mm-hmm. But doesn't he put that on the wrong side of eternity?
and Aslan says, what you did unto Tash, you did unto me.
See, I can't.
And I think what he's trying to play with there is that the parable of the sheep and the goats, where you have and it's a parable, and I don't think we ought to, develop a lot of tons and tons of theology off of one story.
Yeah, one parable.
There was a parable.
Sure.
It's not clear, but I think that's what he's toying with, and that's where he's saying. So Lewis in Mere Christianity says it's absolutely true that you can't come to the Father except through Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, can anybody come to the Father through Jesus and not know it? And he suggests that that's what, and he sort of plays that out in a story form in Last Battle with this character.
Well, I think we all understand. Like,
I don't know if I could say I agree.
I would be surprised if Joe Biden's in heaven. I will. All right.
But here's my.
I'll be surprised if Joel Osteen's in heaven. But God's grace is good and beyond. So I think to your point is like you want to say like we're saved by grace through faith, not of works. Yes, 100%. And then on the other side, we also can say this guy's fruit looks bad, and so he's going to hell according to his fruit. I can judge his fruit. He's going to hell. And then there's some people in the middle where it's like, bottom line is you can't read the hearts of all these people.
Well, but that's exactly my point. If he's willing to make that statement about Ben Shapiro who hates Jesus, then why can't that apply to Candace or anybody else, right? Who might be who he might think is anti-Semitic, or it hasn't been clear they're anti-Semitic. At some point we're starting to say who's in, who's out, and this guy's going to be surprised. And here's a person who professes, are they in? Well,
I wonder if he would.
Well,
I mean, I assume he'd give just as charitable a read to her as he did
Yeah. Well,
I mean, she's a professing Christian.
Right. Exactly.
So I would have every reason. I mean, I would think we have.
But then at that point, then we start opening up to this person who is way over here, who's never professed anything at all about Jesus, and
no, I'm with you completely.
Then we get to universalism real quick. Love wins.
Yeah, no,
Reject that.
So I'm
you see what I'm saying?
I'm 100% with you. I don't even think it's close. I assume that Candace is going to heaven
because she confesses, and
so I mean, I don't know her heart.
Yeah,
sure, but I just
she won't be in a black church when she gets there. I just say that.
She won't.
That's just
God is good all the time.
Or maybe she will. Maybe she will. I don't know.
Well, I was hoping we were all going to be in the same church in heaven.
There are going to be all kinds of churches in one universal church everybody can come to, and then on Mondays and Tuesdays different.
I mean,
anyway.
I'm just thinking I'm
gonna go to the Korean church. Korean churches are the best.
But here's the thing about this. Here's the thing. There's not going to be good dancing in heaven if I'm not in the black church.
Pastor Wilson's gonna be cutting a step. He's gonna be cutting a jig. He's gonna have a praise break.
That's all I wanted to know. I mean, there's some really great African choirs that are gonna lead up at the front.
Here's why
just
you
without the homosexual worship leader. That's
he did not make it.
The choir did, but not the homo leader.
Africans don't have the homo leaders.
Well,
do they?
Some do.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
This is a Candace Owen moment with Pastor Toby.
Now the African folks will be like, "We ain't got that. We don't do that
They're
here."
like executing the.
Well, if you're in Africa, there's some of the American
I'm
stuff.
talking about Africa. That's what I said. African choirs.
Well, there are African choirs that could be in America. Okay, I got to say why the Korean church is so amazing. Then we got to run. The Korean church is so amazing because after church they do a full meal and their Korean style food there. Oh my good! I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. Every service, it was so good. I don't even know how I got there. My dad's like, "Let's go to this Korean church," and it was fantastic.
Well, I guess we're going to end it here because there's a lot I wanted to talk to you about, like anti-Semitism.
I got a few minutes. I got 6 minutes.
You got 6 minutes?
Oh man, sure.
There's a couple points I wanted to hit on because I think the conversation we had with Andrew was 45 minutes, and like there's so many layers that were going on there.
Yeah,
like Andrew's view of salvation. Right.
Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson.
Which I still am like.
And then and I think Toby wrote an article and Andrew Klavan retweeted it. He says, I take the C.S. Lewis side of salvation, which explains. I think it helps a lot of Protestants and all this.
Let me just say too, and we didn't have time to respond to it, and I said this in my article. Andrew, you're wrong about the Paul and Jesus thing, and Paul sometimes saying things that are not in the Bible.
We did respond to that.
I know, very briefly. But
that's all I need to be saying.
But I also don't think Andrew was saying that Paul wasn't inspired because he did say Paul was inspired.
I know. But my whole point, and this is, if I had Andrew in front of me, the thing I would say to you as I thought about it more, as writing my article, is like, Andrew, like all the best stuff about the Jews is from Paul.
Well, I don't think he would disagree with that. He would just be like, yeah, that's the part I accept.
Right. But that's the problem.
Yeah.
Why?
I do want to have a beer with Andrew on that specific. Yeah. So the other thing so then there's like the whole anti-Semitism thing, which is why originally we got Andrew on,
right,
was to kind of talk about, Jesus is king and all that stuff, because he's very much part of the controversy out there. And as I was kind of thinking about this, like the reason why, so Jesus king has no connection to any anti-Semitism for me and for 99% of the world as I see it, or 99% of the Christian world.
Sure.
There's some sort of weird 1% out there, whatever. But I don't, the other reason why I don't really connect with like the anti-Semitism thing, I think Ben Shapiro to me can be a little sensitive about everything's he sees everything as anti-Semitic in a lot of ways, or he's very easily jumps to that conclusion that this is anti-Semitic. But we're growing up in a world that's highly racialized, and we just went through this Black Lives Matter thing.
Went through?
Yeah, well, it's becoming past. You don't see the NFL repping BLM anymore.
That's because they're already in.
You don't see but you don't see the marketing and you don't see any of that anymore. And so we're so highly racialized that
it's not over until Knox.
I'm so desensitized to. It's funny. That's funny. But
I'm sorry, I lost that card, man.
But I'm so kind of desensitized to the BLM. Everything's racial, power struggles. Because
they've been
social justice.
They've been calling us racist and Doug Wilson racist
for the longest time,
for a couple decades.
And so now you have the anti-Semitism thing come up with Jesus King. It's like it's just to me like rinse and repeat BLM.
Right.
Everything's racist. Anti-Semitism. That's all I see. Anything you do is anti-Semitism.
But all you just said is you're numb to it.
If you're against Israel, you're anti-Semitic. All that stuff. So I think that's a big part of this conversation is like that anti-Semitism to me has become like more of a general definition than ever.
But that's been part of the thing that we've talked about for years actually on the show has been, you're absolutely right. This is the CRT, the critical race theory move.
Now we're all in it,
and they've exactly and with it's Marxist at the core, but it's social Marxism, it's cultural Marxism as it has been called, trying to put everybody in boxes and talk about everything as rivalry and envy and enmity. Right. And so you're absolutely right. That's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to rev it up.
Who's they? I
think leftists and liberals are those who
they're trying to use anti-Semitism to stir up.
They've taken what Marx said.
Nick Fuentes wouldn't identify as a leftist.
But this is where Michael Fallon is right.
Mike, you heard that? We done said it
Somebody
here.
Clip that and tag
Send it to
him.
Mike.
I can't see him. So
Mike, but he's going on about this, and I think he's right. I think he's right that there is he calls it a psyop. It's a play trying to get everyone to buy into these categories in order to fulfill the prophecy of Marx, essentially. That we're in
division by classism and racism.
In order for a hero to rise up and its statist, and so we need a totalitarian, strong arm dictator to bring peace to the warring tribes.
So you get it one way or the other, from the right or from the left, and the middle's blown out.
And Trump kind of thrive off this stuff a little bit. Right?
So I think he's definitely got a point. The issue though is that like I don't think the solution then is. It's like you can't really withdraw from the whole thing. You can't escape it.
Yeah.
Now, I think you certainly can tell the truth. Yeah. Which is, I think, what we should do.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can just say like, well, I think I'm going to start saying Christ is King a little less now.
Yeah.
Or no, like you can't.
Can I give an example of this?
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
The last thing I was going to say is, to your point, Gabe, about everything is racist, and now everything's anti-Semitic. I would say what we've been saying since the beginning is, no, not everything is racist, but there is real racism out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been just saying like, so don't the play that what they're trying to do is they're trying to weaponize this, and then everything is racist, and then finally people are like, you know what? Screw it, I'm a racist.
Yeah,
I don't care. Right. I don't care.
I got blackpilled.
I'm a white supremacist.
Nate came to our conference and said, "Don't make the T-shirt." Okay.
What's that?
He said when they start calling you names, don't make the T-shirt.
Nate Wilson. Yeah. So, but I think it's the same thing with anti-Semitism. I think like is the left weaponizing that? Yes, absolutely. Are some people on the right weaponizing it? Yes, I assume so. Are some people actually anti-Semitic? Yes.
Mm-hmm. And this goes into part of what Mike O'Fallon is talking about is the dialectic trap here, right? Like, so they push you off like you described so well. So my point though is like, what do you do when they have set a trap for you to say, you can't say Christ is king?
Right.
Well, if you've been...
Say Christ is king harder.
Well, and that's exactly right. And my point in saying this is Shadrach, Meshach, and a bad Negro, and then Daniel, right? They were already doing things before it ever was illegal.
Weaponized.
And weaponized. And when they saw the enemies of their enemies saw them acting this way, they said, let's make laws that say they can't do this. Some of y'all who are coming to this whole thing, I look at y'all a little funny, but there's some people who've been doing this for 40 years. Right? They've been saying the same thing for 40 years. Yeah. So the trap is set for them not to say it. And what you do is you get up to your window, you open it all the way up, you get down on your knees, and you do the same thing you've been doing for years.
That's right.
Right? You don't stop and you let God. And guess what? They will throw you in the lion's den.
And this is where I would love to have the conversation with you, Mike. Come on.
I've been trying.
Let's have this conversation.
Mike used to like me.
I honestly would. I'm like, this is for real. So I agree completely.
Yeah.
This is that moment in Daniel.
Yes.
Where the CRT Babylonians are coming for Daniel. They're gunning for Daniel.
Yep.
They passed the law.
Yeah.
And the thing that I want to know is, Michael O'Fallon, you're his advisor. You're Daniel's advisor. Do you tell Daniel to go and pray? Or do you tell him, don't do this, it's a trap? Now, there really are some traps out there that you don't have to do.
Yeah.
Like, you don't, the next January 6th rally,
Yeah.
like, don't go.
Yeah.
Don't go. It's a trap. Okay, don't go. But you don't have to go to the next January 6th rally. Now, if somebody says, I saw some anti-Semites at the Walk for Life, the March for Life, I'm going. Now I'm going to talk to them.
Yeah.
I'm going to distinguish myself for them. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Walk for Life is just, we're saving little babies.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a different play.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying it couldn't ever be co-opted and there would never be a time to not go. But I'm just saying, like, I want to know. I'd love to know. I don't want to play into this dialectic, but at the same time, it seems to me that what the key thing is, keep being faithful.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Keep
That's right.
telling the truth. Keep telling the truth.
And just
that's
some
why
nuance
we want to like be very clear. Like, racism is defined by God's word.
That's right.
Like hatred of people, anti-Semitism, racism, whatever you want to call it. It's just defined by God's word. That's why
It's
you're
unequal-
standing there and you can't be moved.
Yeah, it's unequal weights and measures.
That's right.
Partiality. That's the name of the biblical sin, is partiality.
That's right.
Unequal weights and measures. So if you're being impartial, if you have equal weights and measures, if you're treating others the way that you would want to be treated, then you can call us whatever they want.
This needs to be 3 more shows. All right.
I think we solved everything.
If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.
I feel better. I wanted to talk about.
It is the duty of the free man to resist tyranny at every turn. Every man will either watch his freedom stripped away or take action to protect what he loves. Introducing the A3, the newest revolutionary body armor from Armored Republic. The A3 is the new standard for lightweight multi-hit body armor. A3 plates are incredibly light at 4.6 pounds. The patented design captures fragmentation while remaining multi-hit capable. The A3 will stop up to M80 ball, yet comes in at only 0.7 inches thick. The A3 is the thinnest NIJ.06 compliant or certified composite standalone plate that includes the drop test. The A3 is the first of its kind, patent pending, that combines an alloy strike face with polyethylene backing, revolutionizing body armor technology by providing strength and durability while remaining sleek and maneuverable. The A3 is the new standard in lightweight body armor. The fight against tyranny just got stronger.